we are launching the Florida Keepers podcast, where essentially we give you kind of the content we've already been covering, but in a long form, in a more personal view, with just the board talking amongst each other about critical issues facing Florida, facing development, facing threats of our wild land, corruption in our departments. And this week we're launching, so it'll be a bit of a general one, but also we do want to focus in on the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and their recent attempt to actually countersue a lawsuit where they were charged with essentially sewage mismanagement that led to the record deaths of manatees in 2021. So why don't we just open up to that? Anyone on the board want to kick us off of like essentially why this is such a big issue, why FDEP is at the center again, and what we should do about it?
So, why this is a major issue is because in the current political environment everywhere, the environment has been incredibly controversial. And Katrina Shaddix and her group, Bear Warriors United, were able to actually put on a really good fight for these manatees at a federal court. And they ended up winning the lawsuit after it was deemed that FDEP was not responsibly managing the sewage running into this waterway. So, given the environment and the fact that the ruling came out in the environment's favor was really a massive big deal in the environmental conservationist community. And
Right.
yes, and for them to turn around and say that this is a misinterpretation of the Endangered Species Act, which is what was used in reference to the previous lawsuit and how Katrina and her organization came out on a really strong front. Well, the DEP and Ron DeSantis want to bring that to another federal court, and their argument is that this was a misinterpretation of the ESA. This amount of sewage output has nothing to do with the ESA in itself. It's a separate portion of legislature.
Kate, for
And
our
Katrina
listeners, what is the
actually,
ESA?
the Endangered Species Act, it was a monumental act with protections around endangered species and how we interact with our environment and how it affects endangered species. And I feel like this is the state of Florida kind of abusing what's happening with everything else. I know there's a lot of noise, I'm going to use that word, but with the Endangered Species Act right now at the federal level, there's concern that they're going to change the definition of great harm to the environment, which is well defined in the Endangered Species Act. The purpose of this is so that way we can assess. It makes us look at how we measure environmental harm and what we deem something like a development or a pipeline project or a rock mine slash water stormwater management treatment area. That is
Right.
a guiding light. And to see an environmental agency support the idea that we should make the definition of great harm weaker is a really big slap in the face to their entire integrity. And I don't really know what they stand for mission statement wise and everything, but it's definitely not protecting the environment. So if there's one
Right,
thing that
right.
they need to do, it's their job.
Right, and a few other striking things just in what FDEP essentially hit back with was they said that Bear Warriors United should have actually gone after the Fish and Wildlife Commission because this is a, quote, wildlife issue, it's an animal, it's in the waterway. There's two problems that one, an FW researcher was actually the initial person, I forgot her name, but she initially reported on the record manatee deaths in the Indian River Lagoon. And for perspective, this is on the east coast of Florida. Essentially, I mean, it stretches all the way down from Stewart and goes north. So it's a very big body of water. It's crucial for shark nursery, tons of fish nurseries there, turtles, all this stuff needs this area to raise young and then go out in the ocean. But anyhow, that researcher found all this out. She made, her findings known. And then the FWC, we don't know exactly who, but it would have had to have been someone above her, maybe all the way from the top. We don't know for sure. But then she had to change her story. So this does involve the FWC, but it also involves the FDP, who's also been the one releasing the sewage and has the actual infrastructure management, unlike FWC in this part. And then what's really striking is in the one of the articles put out from this ruling, the state is actually arguing that one of the policies of Judge Mendoza to essentially address this situation was, put a moratorium on new septic projects until it can be addressed. And they said the FDEP said the indefinite moratorium on the construction of new septic systems further threatens to impede commercial and residential development in the state. So it's the Environmental Protection Agency, allegedly, their big concern here is not the manatee, it's not the Indian River Lagoon. It appears to be development and slandering the ESA.
Wow.
To top it off, I mean, watching DEP point fingers at pretty much their constitutional partner, since they're a statutorily appointed group. It's a big slap in the face because, they've worked in tandem on a lot of projects, and they haven't really done a great job checking and balancing one another. So to see two organizations that have previously collaborated in what I believe to be, again, development related. And Katrina actually told me one of the statements made by the state in the record on their end highlighted something along the lines of this would some sort of disservice to the profitability of development that's going on in Florida. It's like, oh, they already have plans to do stuff here.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a bit of an interest with like, well, what if we have property owners or development interests that are already building here? Are you technically one of the weird arguments, and this is where it gets weird. They were construing that are you limiting property rights of people that have already invested in this area, and unbeknownst to them, there's somehow manatees in Florida that need protecting. So it seems there's a lot of moving factors, but yeah, it seems just pointing fingers at each other seems to be a long-standing problem for the FDEP, the FWC. But unfortunately, the FDEP is actually, in many instances, less public than the FWC, less accessible, and much more rigid and hidden from actual scrutiny. At least, like, with scrutiny where they have to respond.
Yeah. And on top of that, this is a pattern that we're seeing not just within FDEP and FWC, but like if you guys look at the Southland Water Resource, I say in quotations, project, we saw this with Palm Beach County Commissioners, the zoning board, and just the committee in general, trying to pass on this like burden of responsibility to a different entity because the legal pathway wasn't exactly ironed down. And so to watch leaders who were either elected or appointed completely avoid their, like, what would be assumed, I would think, is their responsibility is really disheartening. It puts me in a position where, as someone who's new to politics, new to the lingo, new to trying to wrap my head around exactly how so much corruption gets through the ranks, it really puts me in a position where I have very little faith, not so much in the structure of the government that we have to work with in the governing bodies, but in the people who are put there and how they get there, which has made obviously Florida Keepers, a prime thing for me to participate in.
Well,
Exactly.
if this is an issue where FDEP is saying that this is the job of FWC, like trying to pass the buck on, um, what has been done then by FWC? And I'm not saying it's necessarily this time it's even their fault.
Mhm.
If there is something that can be done, why hasn't it been done yet? From my understanding, I mean, I've heard about this for years, and I didn't have as much of an understanding of what was going on besides the water quality in, especially the northern part of the Indian River Lagoon was just terrible. And then a lot of the grassland and everything, and the seagrass beds in there are dying off. And my understanding wasn't Bear Warriors United, what's her name, Katrina, wasn't
Katrina.
she like working on like she got permits to be able to move water plants to the manatees, but instead
Yes.
they decided to spray and they didn't. It was something
Mhm.
along those
They
lines where
wouldn't
they.
take her up on her offer. So she had and this is going to be a rough. She had told me this story once at like 1 a.m. when I stayed with her in Ocala at the FWC meeting. So, like, bear with me on the details. This is a rough outline of what I remember her telling me. But essentially, that she had won the permits, the rights to these hydroponics of manatee food, basically, these different plants that manatees typically eat that aren't seagrass. that can float on the surface of the water and feed the manatees. But the FWC, I believe it was FWC, not FDEP, did not accept her permits. They wouldn't take the gift basically and then apply it to the environment for the manatees to eat. Therefore, they starved. And so I think that's where the ball of like FWC could have stepped in. But again, don't quote me on that because it might have been
It might be a little bit
FDEP
more
that had.
complicated than that too. Like,
Yeah, she gave me this like very short summary. I'm there
got you.
picking her brain at 1 a.m. at the FWC commissioners meeting. So, but that's what, I think really kind of stuck her as like the fire because she had the food approved. The permits were there. The body that could have applied those permits and really like spread the food said no. And so then it fell back on Katrina to be like, okay, so what? Am I just supposed to build an infrastructure here to like spread this food and somehow like incorporate it? And then am I going to get in trouble for that with the FWC for some law? You know what I mean? Like it just opens up this can of worms now where we see again this like lack of accountability on any one entity to make decisions other than we're not going to touch it. And that doesn't make any progress for anybody other than whatever destruction we're currently dealing with having its way with nature, which is
Right.
disgusting.
They've already had to actually, it was during 21, it was like a really bad year. And there's actually, you can just look at like the manatee mortality, and essentially that won't show up, but essentially you see a graph and it's, 1974 is over here, 2021 is here, and this is number of manatee deaths recorded in Florida. And it's just essentially you do an average mean, it's just diagonal. And that's pretty publicly available. Maybe it's worse, maybe it's not so bad, but there's certainly a trend. And they've actually had FW staff, and good on them, it was necessary, but they've had to go out and feed the manatees like lettuce and just stuff like that because it got to such a bad point. And seagrass habitat, seagrass beds, that's like one of the most, I mean, it's one of the critical resources, and it's something really, really in threat, imperiled habitat, certainly in Florida.
Yeah.
So
And
what would be
Kate,
their argument against that?
Again,
Why wouldn't they allow Katrina to feed them?
honestly, from what Katrina told me in the story and what I picked up on, it sounded like they just weren't willing to cooperate with her. I don't know if it's something personal to do with the fact that she has this nonprofit organization or not. But again, it seems the higher up the ranks that you go, the more easy it is for these people empowered to make choices to be held less accountable. And accountability is like this trend that I'm finding is missing. And one of the things that we're seeing on social media in particular, and with the public like calling these people out, is that it's the public's form of accountability. If we can bring the story to the public eye, the public immediately reacts because it's absurd. It's not like all you have to do is tell the facts. That's it. People are just unaware because there's not a spotlight yet on these people. And so when entities like us or like Captains for Clean Water or Friends of the Everglades, and Katrina's organization as well, Bear Warriors United, when one of these organizations gets on a wave that the public picks up on, it is amazing the kind of like pressure and what I'm going to call political coverage, kind of a double-edged sword here, that you can afford for these entities to then feel. And, one of those things is more like negative in the public eye. And one of those things really buys not just politicians, but again, elected and appointed officials a chance to make the right choice if there is maybe some shady stuff going on in the background that they don't really want to have to be under the thumb under or of.
right. And that on that same point, what's very interesting is there's just enough information out there what's factually going on to quote expose them. It's not even just exposing, it's just bringing it to light to fact that's already out there. And it's not, you don't have to even dig into anything even somewhat plausible. It's just this is what you guys did. It's not as well known maybe. And that's what really was a fantastic sign that killed the state parks, the Great Outdoors Initiative. That's how that got killed. That's how the Guana land swap deal was killed. And it will be until we have, better politicians who essentially we don't need to petition. Like think of it this way: the idea that we have to petition our politicians in Florida, mind you, this isn't like they're in some other state, or they don't know anything about the Everglades, or they don't live near the Indian River Lagoon. These are Florida politicians that we have to petition to protect, just Florida itself. So the idea that you could make a future where it's politicians who, do good for the economy, for, property rights, taxes, all that good stuff. But you also have one that says, all right, we're not going to let, outside development come this far. We're not going to let these animals be, killed off. And it's not something you have to pester and petition them constantly. That's something that's critically important to get new people in who essentially can just go in the office, do their job, and Floridians can kind of rest easy, or maybe not too easy, but at least know they've actually got people in there that know to do what's right for what we're all calling for, anyways.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
special interests shouldn't be able to buy the ear of our politicians. Like the word politician would be a great word if we could like I'm big on talking about cultural connotations with words, and politician in particular is one that you can't really say without this cultural ugh attached to it. And what I see within the potential of what Florida Keepers is doing is the ability to take that connotation and strip it away and get back to the definition of what a politician is just at its heart and not make it this disgusting, slimy thing that you have to pay to get into the pocket of. The job of a politician should be to listen to the people. Like we the people, by the people, for the people. I it's so simple and it would work if we didn't have special interests specifically outside of Florida. I mean, I would even go so far as to say that if Florida could become a state where the politicians were at least dealing with larger corporations that existed in Florida and that felt the impacts of what the hell's happening here, I would even argue I would take that over what we currently have going on, where it's like, companies from Tennessee, companies from California, people from overseas. Like, you're not even here to feel the difference of what you're doing. And so even that would be a step forward because then I would endorse politicians that we probably, currently have in office. I don't think everyone's awful. I mean, we've seen the work of some really great people on some of these subjects, the guana subject, the Southland subject. I mean, what was the hearing today that just happened? Is today Thursday? I think today's
Yeah.
Thursday. What was
I think
the
there's another water
Water
management project meeting.
district.
Yeah, and it sounded like, I mean, I haven't had a chance to watch that recording yet either. I don't
Good.
think any of us have yet, but it sounds like from what Captains from Clean Water
Yeah.
has reported on that is that there actually was a little bit of accountability brought to the table for how Phillips and Jordan has been kind of like sneakily snaking through this process to get their their rock mine, guys to this water restoration project through the ranks. And so that's really inspiring. And it gives me hope that maybe there's people who really will use that political coverage and run with it. And then we won't have a whole entire system to replace. We'll just have, a few rotten eggs.
Well, this is to me, this whole thing screams as, I mean, there's obviously two separate areas of Florida that deal with a lot of issues, water and land. They're different things, but they all kind of mix together. The water gets all of the crap from the land that's built on. And I mean, whether it is Southland, whether it is up in the Indian River Lagoon, whether it's where I'm from over in Pinellas, like it doesn't matter. That basically the same things are happening. You have development, you have a lot of older towns, a lot of older cities where the infrastructure isn't there, but it's still being built on. So the infrastructure can't handle all the people who move here. It ends up, you have sewage spills, you have, I mean, just runoff in general. We have, golf courses that are put in, or any, just lawns in general that need to be fertilized because the plants aren't from here. It's a whole bunch of little things that add up to this huge thing. And from my understanding, at least when it comes to Indian River Lagoon, the reason that the grass beds are dying off is due to runoff and a lot of the issues with that's killing off the seagrass. And that's the whole point. Like, if we also look at it from that perspective, it's literally the same thing that's happening all over the state. But the biggest issue with this is that up in that area, okay, like where I'm from, manatees can go other places. Like it's easy for them to be able to go out into the Gulf or to be able to just go down the coast a little bit and you're in a whole different area. Of the Indian River Lagoon, as Sergey was saying earlier, it's basically, I mean, it's not landlocked, but it's basically landlocked. There's a couple of areas like Sebastian Inlet, as an example, is one of the major inlets there that where animals can come in and out. But when you're all the way up in the northern Indian River Lagoon, you're cut off from being able to leave. So these manatees get stuck up there,
Yeah,
and
the Banana
there's just
River.
there's nowhere for them to go.
Yeah.
And so, it's that's why it's such a huge deal there in particular, because I mean, it's a unique landscape and a unique area. To me, it blows my mind that the answer to why why the Department of Environmental Protection says that they need to keep on going is because it would slow down progress.
Yeah,
I'm
which is
just
not their thing to worry about. Like, we don't want this is why Rodney Barreto is the face of what we don't want right now, because we don't need a developer concerned about development involved with wildlife or fish protection. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And so for the FDEP to take a stance of like, oh, well, it wouldn't be fair to the developers. It's like, sit down and do your job. Like, mind your place, stay in your lane. That's not your lane.
well,
It
Yeah.
just
And
blows my
you know
mind.
what's interesting is on their webpage, they state their mission as the Florida Department of Environmental Protection protects, conserves, and manages the state's natural resources and enforces its environmental laws. Underneath that, their vision statement to advance Florida's position as a world leader in protecting natural resources while growing the state's economy.
Oh, good God.
well, you got to
Doing
think of
everything but that. They go out of their way and do
The protecting the state's economy is like the blanket. I'm going to just slip this gray area in here so I don't have to be held accountable for destroying Florida and being the opposite of a leader in conservation.
there is good
That's
news
where it gets
though.
yeah, because it can get tricky where it's like, yeah, we want to grow the economy and protect things, and you could technically do that, but the problem is they're saying, oh well, if we accidentally allow more development and we don't care about the manatee, that's part of our
Right.
economy growing, even though that's not really what most Floridians would want. They want obviously a lower tax bill, they want lower grocery bill, they want to be able to start a business, Friday and get it going, in 2 days, but they also want to see, green trees, nice palm trees, manatees, alligators. So it's very interesting when they use that economy moniker to just blanket things.
There are so
Well,
many examples across the globe of people doing this right. I wish I could remember the exact city that was cited for this, but in a documentary called Racing Extinction with one of my favorite photographers, Sean Heinrichs, he points out the fact that I think it's like, oh, I don't know well enough to quote it, but basically there's a city over in Asia that is doing this green growth within economy, within their infrastructure, specifically for cities. And it's successful and it's working and it flourishes. And so this is where I love this about Florida Keepers as an individual entity, in contrast to what typically people would like interact with in terms of like a greener mindset of an entity. This is not an issue that can be looked at from the culture of, is it a liberal issue? Is it a conservative issue? Is it a Democratic issue? Is it a Republican issue? This is an issue that when you really look at the facts, we all want, I mean, Florida Keepers, I think as the board, we can all say that we want to see the economy in Florida continue to grow, but we want to see it grow from a sustainable place that allows all of the generations to reap the benefits of that growing economy. If we continue to build and develop and grow the economy, I say in quotes, the way we have for, say, the last 100 years or so, there's not going to be anything left. And we're going to see a massive collapse, not just in economy, but in environment. And so if we want a future in financial abundance, we have to do it differently. We have to update the way we look at how are we going to take what we have and grow it. It's not by tearing down more trees. It's not by figuring out how to build more reservoirs so we can put more dirty water in there to clean it. Like,
Mhm.
not the way forward. And it terrifies me that with some of the antiquated mindsets that we have in positions of power, and I say antiquated not because they're old physically, I say it because they're like in this industrial age of mindset that just can't continue to go down this like beat the earth into the ground path. I fear that we're going to lose that opportunity for, our generation, the further generation behind us. Like, it's just this very slippery slope. Nothing personal against these politicians, nothing like, I'm sure they're lovely people, but at this point I don't care because they're not doing their job well enough to protect the future for anybody else.
There
So,
is good news though, when it
is
comes
there,
to,
Dean?
well, there is. Well, when it comes to FDEP, so unlike FWC, which is all the commissioners are appointed, you don't get the vote on that. The FDEP is made up of the cabinet of Florida. They now
Right.
there are positions that are put it like
I
the
think the secretary is appointed, but
yes,
you're
the
correct
secretary is
about the rest
appointed.
of the cabinet being the
the
rest of
but
the
the
board,
the
essentially.
governor, the Department of the commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, and there was a couple. I don't remember every single one. It was like the treasurer or the CFO, and like there was a couple of other, but they're all. That's why when they were talking about like bolstering the economy of Florida, they're not wrong because the people that are in charge of this agency are literally like the people who run the state. So
Right.
that is their job. Now, the good thing is that you can vote most of these people out. Now, the bad
Wow.
news for me is that I voted for some of these people because I like them. But at the same
Come on,
time, like
Dean.
that's the hard part. I will be the first to admit that. Like that's the
Yeah.
hard issue here is that I'm not a one person vote or like one issue voter.
Yeah.
I try to look at a bunch of things, and don't get me wrong, um, the environment is something that we need to like. It's something that it needs to be, especially here in Florida, it needs to be a primary focus. And as I get older, I'm starting to really realize that just because I like somebody on some maybe economy stuff doesn't mean that that they don't hold all my values. So
Yeah.
it's a weird slippery slope because it's like
Yeah.
that all over the place. And that's why I think pushing for a newer generation of people, because let's be honest, most of the politicians who are there now from older generations, when I say older generations, I'm gonna say 40 and older,
Yeah.
50 and older, right now the politician class for the most part, they tend to be, they consider themselves Republicans or Democrats. There's like they toe a party line.
Yeah.
And that's the issue that I'm having because I'm a conservative who cares about the environment. I believe in global warming. Like I believe
Right.
I believe in evolution and science and all this stuff that a lot of people that I know don't believe because it's just a different way of thinking. So I think that
Because it
there's a
doesn't
lot more.
follow party lines. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of people who are like me who are out there that are coming up that have a different way of thinking. And that's why I'm saying don't vote Republican or Democrat because you're whatever. Vote for what you think is right. But I think more people are going to see people who have those types of opinions where it's not just party line stuff for it's I mean, again, that's the whole point of this. I mean,
Yeah,
eventually we're gonna,
exactly.
some of us are gonna run for positions of power at some point, and I hate to even put it that way, but that's the point: is that there will be people who have these types of opinions that are more green. I hate to say it that way, but that's just how it is. That are more green, but come from multiple different points of view.
Right. And like off that, like even it was about a month ago, Senator Pizzo, who was the top elected Democrat in the state, on the Senate floor. He essentially gave a speech, and so he left the Democrat Party in that speech, but he left as a non-political affiliate, and essentially called out both parties, saying, "All right, like when I've done all the work I've done, it's always been as a Floridian for Floridians. I did the calls, I did the meetings, I did this stuff, I did constituent services because they're Floridians, not because they were a Democrat or Republican." And like when he also expressly said like both sides have special interests, they have money, all this stuff. So to hear that from someone that high up is, I mean, it's a good sign in saying that things are hopefully moving in a different direction. Because yeah, it's very the idea, and that's what even like sometimes we as an organization we hear or we get opinions shared to us where it's like, well, it's all this party's doing this, it's all that party doing that. It's like, well, at the end of the day, it isn't about being against one or the other party. It's about how can we have tangible politicians who have political solutions that are aware of the environmental threats going on. And trust me, if you ask the average elected Florida politician, and I'm talking about especially higher ups that are more like state senators or state representatives. You ask them what exactly is going on in the Indian River Lagoon. You ask them the discharges from Lake Okeechobee. You ask them about the spinning fish disease in the Keys. Most of them don't know. And obviously, I think that it should have the volition and the interest to know, but they don't. So it's no longer just about the party. That's gonna probably waste more time than not, instead of, educating the current politicians, and then I would argue, and we would probably all argue, getting better people in, might most likely a younger class of people. Not that the younger generation is always smarter necessarily, but a lot of our politicians they're older, and they also, what I've found, especially even when Barreto talks, he's always, a lot of them talk from a lens of when they grew up in Florida, 20 years ago, 40 years, whatever it is, and they sometimes I think they have a jaded perspective that they still think it's that wild. Like I remember Beretta at some meeting was talking about how he used to like paddle around or go on the boat around Biscayne Bay, and it was this beautiful area. It's like, yeah, I mean, like 50 years ago, it was a lot better. It was a lot more wild. Glad he had that opportunity. But
Doesn't
don't
look
you,
like
yeah, but don't you see
Yeah.
that we want that too, or at least like some of that back, you know?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the psychology of that is interesting that you bring that up, Sergey, because I feel like this falls into, we're a newer organization, and the board spends a lot of time talking about our ethics and our values and this concept of trickle up information, because something that I think our board has that is really lacking at our higher level state representative and senatorial positions is this true interest to understand the information for ourselves, so that when we have people come to us within our chapters and within our organization with concern, we have an understanding of like, okay, what is the larger parties at play here? Who do we need to interact with to actually make a difference? It primes us to be able to make educated next steps, not opinionated next steps. And it makes all the difference in how we've been successful, because the information we're then communicating to the general public is so poignant. It's this, we have a really beautiful machine of information communication going on right now. And if we had people in these positions who are more willing to do that, I don't think they would be so blinded by things like, almost like this I don't know if appropriation is the right word, but when something happens over such a long period of time, you kind of just accept it for what it is. Well, there's this argument that the younger generation never got to see what it was like 40 years ago. So they don't even know what they missed out on. But I think there's this other side to that where it's like, okay, sure, 40 years ago when you were a kid growing up in Florida, you saw A, B, C, D, and E all thriving. And now you don't see that so much anymore, but you're not even aware of how different it is because you've been here the whole time. You've slowly been introduced to the downfall of wildlife, and you've accepted it because you don't know how to fight it. And I think that's where getting younger people in to the field and to the arena per se is really the tactic, because we have, and this is not any knock to, I mean, no one should have to fight until they're 80 to save Florida. Like that shouldn't be the dialogue we have to follow. So you've done your time. You've fought hard, you did your work. You should get to live your American dream and not have to work past your retirement age and like go enjoy Florida, right? So we don't need 60-year-old, 70-year-old, 80-year-old politicians still fighting for the same thing they were fighting for 40 years ago. We need fresh blood. We need people who would just have so much energy and so much gusto to throw at this that they can make change happen in 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, because that's more of the realistic timeline we're looking at for saving wild Florida.
Well, what you just said, I thought of an example in my life that really kind of pushed me in this general direction. I grew up on the water. I grew up fishing. One of the things that I was told all the time as a kid was when, like, old cracker sitting there. I was working at a tackle shop, and he comes in and he's, leathery skin. He's wearing one of the, actually a type of like a fishing shirt I have on right now, and he's coming in and he goes, when I was a kid, we could go out and in the morning we'd catch 100 trout in a single morning, and we could do that every single day. And then he'd be like, and then they changed the regulations and they made it 12 inches. And I was like, well, what do you have it at before? They were like, well, there was no limit on it. And I'm like, holy crap. I'm thinking now that, I mean, you can go out and catch trout still, but like you might get lucky to get a few of, like 20 trout in a day is like a big deal. Like, and that's the thing is like you look at that and the, I'm sorry to say this, and I'm repeatedly going after the older generation, but that is something that they viewed as like normal to go out and catch 100 of this or 100 of that every
Yeah.
day. That it was, if it was a failure if you didn't, and they kept everything. And I'm sitting here like, I just want to be able to catch fish now.
Yeah.
Not even like worried about keeping a certain, like there people are getting mad when they changed the sheephead limit from 15 to 12 a few years back. And it's like,
Right.
yeah, we have millions of people who have moved here since just 2020. Think about
Yeah.
that. Let alone 1970. The amount of people in the population increase, you can't sustain the same pressure. We
Yeah.
have to change it. And the thing is that conservation is not necessarily like, you're not necessarily looking to keep it exactly where it was back in the 1800s before any real major destruction happened in Florida, as an example. You're trying
Right.
to make it so that the populations of things are sustainable and that
Yep.
they reproduce, and you can use that resource and view it as a resource without over harvesting. And that's the whole point. But it's the same thing with land, except in land, you're not getting that back mostly, depending on what you do to it. So there's a
Yeah.
lot more of an effort that you have to do to get that area back. And when you develop it, it's not like you can just leave it alone and things go back to the way they were. You have to put in that effort. You have to protect it from being destroyed in the first place. Because if you go to restore an area, it's going to be more than a generation to get it back to the way it was. And we'll never be able to see that. Our kids probably won't ever be able to see that. So
Yeah.
we need to do something now, and that's, I guess, one of the things that is pushing me to, and I mean us in general, I think, to really harp down on these certain individuals and certain groups that have something to do with it, that we tangibly can do something about and call out. Because
Yeah.
if we don't, if we just let it keep on going the way it is, it's going to be changed, as you said, before your eyes, before you realize it, and you'll look back and be like, wow, it's changed a lot
Yeah.
since I was a kid,
And
and
the sad
now
part
there's,
about
yeah.
that, Dean,
Right.
it's been weaponized. Parties have been weaponized against people. And the people who grew up in the 60s and the 70s, they were like, and maybe you could even argue earlier than that, but parties within politics were weaponized as means of basically marketing tactics. And we see this happen even today, just within like factions of the green people, right? The people who want to see wild Florida be protected. The best thing that these entities that we actually can hold accountable for the decisions they make, that actually hold power, the best thing they could possibly do to protect themselves from being held accountable is to turn us against one another within factions of the same cause. Best thing they could possibly do to waste our time, waste our energy, and make us think that the enemy, per se, as they would want us to view it as, is within our own group
Right.
rather than what we're looking at right in front of us.
Yeah, and I've like what's very disheartening to see is there are some who will do that very thing, but then when like the Southland Rock Mine project comes up, or the stuff with the FDP, they say it's too much of a challenge. I can't really focus on that because it's almost impossible to be developed anyhow. So time and even art, we have to make sure we are doing the same thing. Time and effort on this can't be wasted on either trivial matters or things that can be quickly solved, quickly enacted on, and then you move on because
Right.
there's plenty of work to do without making more of it for yourself.
Amen to that. And I think that's pretty much what, if you guys have enjoyed what you've listened to so far within this introductory kind of welcome to our behind the scenes conversation style podcast, if you've enjoyed what we've discussed and how we've discussed it, the how being really like the big focus here, that's what makes Florida Keepers unique. We have this way of bringing very different mindsets, very different party affiliations to the same table breaking bread and actually getting conversation done to have actionable steps to hold people accountable, to make change happen. We have seen it happen within the first 6 weeks of our existence. The guana land swap is like, I don't know. I don't know if we just got involved at the right timing for that, but we saw that wave. We appreciated what that wave was about through social media. We hopped on it. And within 4 days, that proposal for the land swap was, we are kind of, I guess, under the impression and surmising that Tallahassee might have reached out to them and said, hey, we can't keep our promises with this. It's too scary. You need to pull this out. And it happened within 4 days. It was miraculous. And so if you've enjoyed things like that, welcome to the table. This is where we get things done. This is how we get things done. And everyone from every perspective, hunters, vegans, Democrats, Republicans, something else that now exists that I don't have the word for that's probably more extreme. I don't know. Like, you're all welcome to the table for conversation here at Florida Keepers.
Perfect.
What do you think, guys? Should we wrap it up there for our first episode? Keep it short and sweet for our little introduction.
Yeah. Well, it's almost 7:30 too. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
meeting,
think we're
a very
touching base
important
on
Thursday meeting.
a lot of good things. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome, guys. We plan on doing this weekly and eventually, not going to make any promises for when, but making this a live event where you guys can actually tune in while we're recording these episodes, ask us questions while we're on air, and then these will be published as podcasts from here on out. Not exactly sure when we'll have, I'm not going to make promises right now, but it is coming. It's in the pipeline, and we're so excited to just be here and be sharing all of this with you guys. And tune in every Thursday is what we aim for, unless there's a more important cause or meeting going on. But otherwise, yeah. Happy Thursday, guys, and I guess we will see you all next week.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Awesome. See ya.
Thanks.